Good afternoon. In just a few moments, we will begin the first session of the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts webinar series, Volunteer Here, Returning to Collections Care. I'd like to wait just a brief moment to allow all of us to arrive in the virtual space. In the meanwhile, thank you for joining us. If this is your first time logging into an educational program presented by the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. And thank you also to participants who have been sticking with us for workshops and discussion virtually. We really do hope to see you soon in person. I'm Stephanie Bailey. I'm the Education Program Manager and Preservation Consultant at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. This session is being recorded, and it will also be shared with you via email in a day or two, along with a resource sheet from our speaker today. Today's session is the first of 4 in the Volunteer Here series, and it's a Zoom webinar. So in this format, you may send a message to the speaker in the chat box. All questions and comments that you put there will be addressed after the presentation. That being said, however, my colleague Alana Schaefer is here with us too in the Zoom room, and she's monitoring the chat box all the while in case you have troubleshooting questions. And you can chat directly with Alana in the chat box. All you have to do is select the pull-down menu and choose CCAHA host. So now I can see the closed captioning is already activated on my screen. And if you haven't done so already and would like the captioning to appear on your screen also, just put your cursor over the footer and select the closed caption button, and you will get those captions starting to go across your screen. Thank you to our funders who make the Volunteer Here webinar series possible. These programs of the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts are funded with generous grant support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the William Penn Foundation, and the Independence Foundation. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Amelia Emig, who is the Preservation Specialist at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. Amelia has held significant roles in collections management and care and collections registration. And today she is presenting Welcome Back, Speedy Tips for Collections Staff Working with Volunteers. Amelia?
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, and welcome again, everyone. Again, my name is Amelia Emig. My pronouns are she and her. And I am currently located in sunny Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I would like to acknowledge that my presentation is being recorded on the traditional lands of the Shawnee and Osage peoples and their ancestors. So before we get started, a note about our organization, the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, or CCAHA. We are a nonprofit paper conservation lab and preservation education organization, and we also offer digitization and framing services. CCHA is based in Philadelphia, but we work with organizations and clients all around the country. You can learn more about us and what we do at our website, ccaha.org. So as Stephanie mentioned, today's program is the first of 4 in our Volunteer Here series, which is geared toward volunteers that work with collections, as well as staff that run collection-centered volunteer programs. We designed this series with small institutions in mind. The first 2 sessions will revisit the basics of working in a collections volunteer program within the backdrop of the new normal, while the last 2 sessions will offer practical training in collections-related topics that organizations can use for training volunteers in collections work. It's my hope that you'll come away from today's session with some good resources that you can use to better prepare yourselves and your volunteers for returning to work with collections. And we'll also share a resource page later via email that includes links to the sites we'll mention today and some other material. And lastly, as mentioned, we do have time set aside at the end for questions and comments, and we're hoping to hear from you. I think we're all aware that discussions around COVID-19 can elicit a range of opinions and responses. So we respectfully ask that in commenting or engaging with other participants, you please keep these guidelines in mind. So all of that said, and thanks for bearing with me, let's get going. Whether you have been back on site for a while, or you've just recently returned, or maybe your site remains closed, wherever you are in welcoming back staff, volunteers, and visitors, I want to say thank you for taking good care of your collections in these very challenging times. Your dedication is appreciated by so many of us who visit and love your collections and historic spaces. So thank you for doing what you do. Let's get started with a quick poll. So Alana, if you could please unleash the poll question. So the question is aimed at those of you whose institutions are open again. I'd like to know, has your institution allowed collections volunteers to resume their work on site? And just to clarify, in thinking about collections volunteers, these are volunteers who are working directly with collections, whether that's in registration, processing, helping with installation, direct roles in collections care. I also want to say that while we're not looking specifically at interns today, I think a lot of what we'll talk about can relate to volunteer interns. I'm sure many of you may have interns who work with your collections as part of their time on site. So I don't know if we want to wait a little bit on the poll results, or
we have about 67%
okay.
responded. Yeah, so I can read out the results as they are now if you'd like, or we can give it another moment.
Give a few more seconds for folks to chime in. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll keep moving, and when we've got a comfortable number, Alana, just pop in and let me know.
We do have about 2/3,
okay,
or 3/4, however. So I will say it's pretty overwhelmingly yes at this point. So
overwhelmingly yes. Okay, good.
About 80% responded. We've got 63% that said yes, volunteers have returned, 26% no, and 11%, oh, now 14% it is a bit more complicated.
It's complicated, right? So that's good. The majority of folks look like you're open, at least in some capacity, understanding it's complicated for a lot of us in a lot of ways right now. So, but it's good to see that the majority of you are open and letting your volunteers come back to their work. That's great. So one of the major challenges mentioned by many institutions who have reopened is getting their volunteers to return to in-person work. Now, it should be acknowledged that there are differences in the work done by public-facing volunteers who lead tours and engage directly with visitors, and collections volunteers who probably work more in the back of house and may only interact with select staff members. But I think in general, a lot of the concerns expressed are very similar for all types of volunteers. The conversation about volunteer retention in terms of COVID safety and returning on site has been happening for a while now, and it is very much still ongoing. A thread appeared just last month in Museum Junction, which is an open forum of the American Alliance of Museums, and it started with that exact question. Is anyone struggling to get volunteers to come back in during the current pandemic? The poster who asked this question said that she was new in her role as the volunteer coordinator, and she was having trouble getting volunteers to cover shifts for tours and programs. She was concerned it was something that she was doing in her process. This post got several responses that offered reassurance that the writer was not alone. And here are a few of those comments. So if you have had trouble, or you are still having trouble in volunteer retention or getting new volunteers, know that you're not alone. As you start thinking about ways to resume your volunteer programs, remember that your colleagues have shared ideas and models that can help. Online communities like Museum Junction can be a good place to start. Another resource is the American Association for Museum Volunteers, AAMV. In July 2020, AAMV released the results of a survey they did with volunteer managers, asking questions related to the impact of COVID and volunteer engagement and training. They later did the survey again with some tweaks, and they posted those results in March of this year. You can download the survey results on the AAMV website, and if you haven't taken a look at these, I would encourage you to do so. The comments and suggestions are super interesting and offer insight into the kinds of challenges and successes other volunteer supervisors are seeing. It gives you a look at some of the concerns that volunteers are expressing to staff in terms of returning to work and COVID safety. And it also offers ideas for ways to keep your volunteers engaged. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. This information can be useful in your planning efforts, but you do want to make sure that in any planning discussions, you're keeping a focus on your organization, its mission, and its specific goals and resources. It's helpful to put yourself in the potential frame of mind of your volunteers. There are many reasons that volunteers may be hesitant or unable to return right now. Here you see listed a few common concerns captured by those AAMV surveys. COVID safety is definitely the major theme. Thinking about the kinds of questions and concerns people might raise will allow you and your institution to brainstorm ways to put strategies in place where possible to try to help your volunteers feel more comfortable. For example, we know that for a lot of folks, their schedules have shifted, maybe due to personal commitments or other work. You as a supervisor may want to think about ways you can be more flexible and accommodating with things like hours, training requirements, and canceled shifts to help people feel better about adding their volunteer shifts back into their schedules. In all of these conversations, it's good to be clear about the steps and the expectations for both the volunteer and the supervisor. From a collections management standpoint, it's always important to make sure the work your volunteers are doing follows approved guidelines and is well documented. This helps to ensure consistency in intellectual and physical control of the collection, among other points. As we have certainly seen over the past 18 months plus, situations can shift quickly. If your volunteer chooses not to come back at all or is unable to come back for a while, and they're in the middle of a project, are there written notes that will enable someone else to pick up where they left off? If you yourself are not able to come back into the office for a while, is there a plan in place for a colleague to supervise your volunteers? And can you check in virtually? Or if your whole site closes suddenly and no one is allowed to come in for days or weeks, are your artifacts secure? It's so easy to leave a collection out on a processing table while you and your volunteer are working on it. I have been guilty of this myself 100%. But the pandemic has reminded us that we need to consider what happens if we go home on Friday and we can't come back in on Monday. There's a lot to think about, and we definitely cannot prepare for every scenario. But we can set ourselves up to better respond to challenges by having plans and guidelines in place to help minimize risk to the collections. Creating a plan for closure scenarios, along with having up-to-date policies for collections management activities, can help you be better prepared for sudden changes. Many organizations have used COVID shutdowns or slower periods right now to have staff create or revise collections management policies and procedures for the institution. This may be something you can work on with an interested collections volunteer. So hopefully it's a little easier to incorporate your volunteers into your COVID safety initiatives because we're already doing these steps with our staff. And to me, this really gets at the supervisor making sure your volunteers know what's expected of them and helping them to feel informed. Be clear about your organization's current protocol for health screening, masking, and social distancing, as well as any changes or restrictions to how you move through your building spaces. Make sure your volunteers know who they can go to with questions about the protocol. And remember that some people may be more comfortable asking questions about COVID safety in an anonymous format. It's important to treat volunteer concerns and medical status with the same discretion used for staff. In being upfront about the steps your organization is actively taking to reduce the spread of COVID, you're demonstrating to your volunteers that you value their safety, and you're also reducing the chance for confusion when they do come on site. Is your institution requiring everyone to complete a self-reported health questionnaire before arriving each day? Have you implemented new cleaning procedures? Have you added time or capacity restrictions on your break room areas? Those are things that should be shared with returning volunteers before they come on site, as well as with potential volunteers. A quick comment on vaccination policies, which we are starting to see cultural organizations requiring their staff to be vaccinated against COVID. Vaccination policies specifically regarding volunteers is a topic being talked about right now in places like Museum Junction. A lot of organizations are trying to gauge where their peers are as far as if they are applying the policy to their volunteers or not. Even if a vaccination policy is not something your organization is able to address at this time, I would suggest that you be ready for it as a question, since it certainly may be on the minds of your volunteers. It's also important to know who is on site and when, certainly in terms of COVID safety, but also for general security practices. For many reasons, it's helpful to have volunteers log their shifts. If you don't currently ask your volunteers to keep track of their working hours and days, this is a good time to start that practice. And it can be a very simple timesheet form. Budgeting for supplies is another point to consider as your volunteers come back. Again, this is something most of us have been doing, and there's been some time for organizations to hopefully plan and build in extra funds to their budget. But do consider the impact that your returning volunteers may have on your supplies. Will you need additional gloves and disposable masks, more hand soap, paper towels, and hand sanitizer? All of the fun accessories we've come to expect in the pandemic. I can't let supplies go by without showing a few fun masks. Something we saw fairly quickly at the start of the pandemic was institutions producing their own branded masks or masks based on items in their collections. There are some really cool object-inspired masks online. I love seeing what different sites do with these. On the top left, you see an Alma Thomas painting in the collection of the National Museum of Women in the Arts in DC and the mask they made based off of it. And on the right, a more basic, museum branded mask by a museum based here in Pittsburgh. I think it's a double win, right? Promoting your favorite collections and improving your mask game. If your site has already made masks, perhaps you can offer a complimentary one to your volunteers, or it could make a great volunteer holiday gift. Speaking also of hand sanitizer, I wanted to mention the Library of Congress's hand sanitizer study. As we all know from our pandemic diaries, hand sanitizer quickly appeared seemingly everywhere. The Library of Congress's Preservation Research and Testing Division did a short study to look at the potential effect of hand sanitizer transferred from our hands to collection items. They looked at materials that are common in the library's collection and in most collections. And this included 5 kinds of paper, book cloth, parchment, and leather, and they looked at 2 classes of hand sanitizer, alcohol-based and water-based. The LOC study is admittedly a small sample, but it provided preservation knowledge that is practical for the archives, libraries, and museums communities. The study had a few takeaways. They found that the use of hand sanitizer does indeed introduce a measurable risk of transferring residues that can cause discoloration of objects. If hand sanitizers are used, allow your hands to thoroughly dry to reduce the potential for transferring sanitizer to the object. Alcohol-based sanitizers showed more harmful results than water-based sanitizers. Washing and drying your hands often and well remains the preferred option in working with collections and from a safety standpoint. But if hand sanitizers are used around collections, water-based sanitizers are preferred. Another fantastic resource that has come about in the pandemic is the REALM Research Project. REALM is a collaboration between OCLC, which is a global library cooperative, the United States Federal Institute of Museum and Library Services, and Battelle, which is an applied science research and development company. There were questions about human safety and collections objects that popped up pretty quickly in the pandemic, especially for institutions with circulating collections. The Realm project has helped the cultural heritage community better understand how the virus interacts with our collection objects and materials used in collection spaces. The Realm project has worked with the Library of Congress, the National Archives and Records Administration, the National Park Service, and numerous other cultural organizations. The Realm website has resources designed specifically for archives, libraries, and museums, including a number of free webinars. You can download their test results, including raw data, and go deep into the data if you like. But if you or your volunteers have questions about the virus and collection materials, Realm is a super helpful resource. We've talked about this in a few ways today, but the need for frequent and clear communication is a point that surfaces over and over with volunteers. During pandemic closures or slow times, and also for volunteers who aren't ready or able to return to on-site work, it's important to keep your volunteers posted on the status of your site and changes to your COVID safety protocols, as well as updates on your exhibitions and your programming. And there are many good suggestions out there for more content-specific ways to engage with your volunteer corps. Here are just a few ideas. And those AAMV surveys are a good place for inspiration. The points here were adapted from a webinar produced by the Ohio Museums Association. Part of this is also the more personal side of the staff-volunteer relationship, right? Remembering to set aside time to say hello and check in with each other. And listening is another important part of communication. Give your volunteers a way to be heard. And here again, keep in mind that especially right now, folks may prefer an anonymous format to ask questions or relay concerns. Certainly out of necessity, a lot of the ideas for engagement right now are virtual, meaning your volunteers tuning in from home will need access to the internet and a computer and some technical know-how. And this can be a challenge and present barriers for people. There are, of course, still ways to talk that don't involve a computer. If you look at the AAMV studies and elsewhere, you'll see comments about staff picking up the telephone and calling their volunteers on a regular basis. Or you may have volunteers who benefit from getting hard copies of articles and other material in the mail. I think it's helpful to find out what works best for your volunteers and try to meet them in a format that is good for them, but also workable for you. You likely already know this, especially with volunteers who've been with you for a while. But even if you aren't sure if your volunteers would really latch on to doing things via Zoom or other online platforms, it may be worth exploring. There are lots of suggestions around the idea of hosting live online training sessions or presentations from your director or a curator and recording them for later use and sharing. That's something that can also help you later on. For example, if you can share that recorded content with new volunteers and get them up to speed more quickly. For volunteers who are open to receiving electronic resources, there is a wide world of webinars and online offerings related to preservation and collections care. A lot of this material is available free and on demand and can be shared with your volunteers as continuing education or as a catalyst for virtual chats. Maybe asking folks to share something interesting they learned in a particular webinar. I would, of course, encourage you to keep tabs on the programming we do here at CCAHA and to look at the free recordings on our YouTube channel. Another awesome source is the Connecting to Collections Care program, which offers a free online listserv community, and they do free webinars on all kinds of collections care topics. It's certainly a reality that for many small sites, volunteers fill key roles with your collections. As you plan for volunteers to return to in-person work, it's a good time to think about the kinds of work they do with your collections and make sure it's aligned with the relevant standards and best practices. What kinds of projects could your volunteers do in the future? What parts of your volunteer program could be strengthened? How can you be more inclusive in your recruitment? What parts of pandemic-inspired changes like virtual training can help you going forward? Having an open dialogue with your staff and your volunteers can benefit the structure of the volunteer experience and your day-to-day work as well. In that Museum Junction thread that we talked about earlier, there was a comment made that I thought was a very smart observation. The commenter said that while the volunteers' experiences froze the day the museum initially closed, the museum has continued to operate, and normal looks a lot different than what the volunteers are accustomed to. This comment to me is a great reminder that many of our volunteers are returning to altered landscapes in their jobs and their social activities. And some extra patience and flexibility may benefit the transition back to the office for everyone. It's something that we're saying to our staff and ourselves right now. So don't forget to include your volunteers in that as you welcome them back. I think it goes without saying that collections volunteers are often very enthusiastic and very knowledgeable, and they can be great ambassadors for the collections they support. As a supervisor, finding ways to adapt and grow that volunteer relationship is a positive thing you can do for your collections and your institutions in these curious times. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much for sharing your time today. My email address is listed here. If you have questions or want to drop me a note later on, please do. One of the best parts of my job is getting to connect people with resources that help them. I assuredly do not have all the answers, but I will do my best to help you find them. And I'm fortunate to get to draw on the knowledge of my talented colleagues at CCAHA. Again, we'll also email a resource page that includes links to the sites mentioned today and some of the other material. And I hope these will be helpful for you and your volunteers as you navigate the road ahead. So if there are questions or comments, we can take a look at those now. And if not, thank you again, everyone. Do we have any questions in the chat?
Did have a question pop up in the
Okay.
chat for that. It says, have you seen any figures on just how many volunteers we've lost?
That's a great question. I can't think of seeing an overarching study. Places like the AAMV surveys and even just sort of collective comments on the open forums like Museum Junction, people weigh in, and some folks say they've seen as much as half of their volunteers disappear. There's a couple of qualifying factors there. Some of us have volunteers who are regular, steady all of the time, who were seasonal to begin with, and who may come and go for other reasons. So it's important to keep those factors in mind. But a lot of comments in the surveys and in places like Museum Junction, you'll see people weigh in with different answers. And that's a great question.
I have another one here. Can you say a little bit more about vaccination policy?
Yeah, sure. So this is super interesting. It's a very now topic. There was, like I said, a post in Museum Junction just last week or maybe a week and a half ago. And it really seems like people are trying to feel out what other institutions are doing. And of course, it should be said that, like all of this, the experience of you as a staff person and your volunteer can be very different depending on what part of the country you're in right now, and as far as your local practices and mandates regarding protocol for COVID. It sounded like from the Museum Junction responses, it sounded like a lot of people were also applying, if they required vaccination for staff, they were applying that to volunteers. I think some other museums anecdotally, I can think of one I spoke with recently, and they said, we're not asking our volunteers to be vaccinated. They are having them complete a form that states essentially if they're vaccinated or not. And if they're not, then they agree to, wearing a mask on site and a little bit of a separate protocol. But a lot of museums are using forms to help sort of track that information and get the volunteer to sign off to say, yes, I am vaccinated, or no, I'm not, and I understand that I will, follow this protocol. The Museum Junction article had a few samples of forms that people were using. And AAMV had also posted sort of a related form of just a sort of COVID safety and questionnaire form that they were sharing with, people could share with their volunteers. So again, I think that's a good way to have written communication and just be open with people so that they know this is where you stand right now and that they know that it might shift going forward. That's another great question. And I'm scrolling through the chat. If I miss any other questions, please let me know. Other than that, thank you so much, everyone.
And thank you, Amelia. Thank you for sharing your tips, but even for reiterating the fact that there are common concerns, because we really are all in this together. So your words are very much appreciated, and I will close the webinar by saying, please join us next week for another, it'll be the second webinar in the 4-part series. And next week will be Speedy tips for volunteers returning to collections work. Even if you're not a volunteer, you are welcome to join us on that webinar. And please also let your volunteers know if they would like to pop in the webinar, where to find the link. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.